So Kim, what's on your radar?
Well, there have been a lot of court cases regarding vaccine mandates. Headlines have been circulating online celebrating courts upholding vaccine mandates, while other headlines celebrate courts halting them. A lot of these headlines have been misleading. So today I want to go over some of the rulings, some of the cases that are currently making their way through the courts, and how the courts might rule when they finally hear them, particularly the Supreme Court. Essentially, I want to put this in as much plain speak as I can so we can all understand what's happening and what isn't happening. So let's start with the cases that seem like courts have ruled in favor of vaccine mandates. 3 days ago, reports were circulating declaring that the courts had ruled in favor of United Airlines COVID-19 vaccine mandates for their employees. But this isn't accurate. What this court ruling was about was whether or not the United Airlines employees who have refused to get the vaccine are suffering so much imminent, irreparable harm by being put on unpaid leave that the mandate itself needed to be stopped while the courts decide on the bigger issue. And the court said no. They indicated that something like money could maybe make the situation better. Plus, United Airlines said that these employees could use their paid vacation and sick time while United Airlines gives them the opportunity to file for a new non-customer-facing position. United also promised to restore any of their seniority or other benefits they may have accrued while they were on leave. So the court decided these employees didn't sound like they were being harmed to the point that it would require emergency court intervention. Sounds like the damage could be repaired. So the court made it clear it was not making a constitutional decision about the mandates themselves, and it was not even making a decision about the legality of United's accommodations for these employees. They actually state this very clearly on the first page, so it's confusing why this was so widely misreported. It seems like they could have just clicked on it and read it. But another case that was inaccurately reported involved a federal judge refusing to block mandates for federal workers and contractors. This case involved 18 civilian service members and 2 Marines, but the reason the judge refused to block the mandate was because she had already put a restraining order blocking the plaintiffs from being forced into the vaccine and preventing them from being fired or retaliated against in any way. She ruled it was pointless to issue an emergency court order for a vaccine they may never need to take to prevent wage losses for jobs they may never lose. Makes sense. Now, Supreme Court Justices Amy Coney Barrett, Sonia Sotomayor, and Stephen Breyer have also refused to block mandates, and none of them have really given lengthy reasons as to why. Amy Coney Barrett refused to block Indiana University's mandate for employees and students. Sotomayor declined to block a mandate for all New York City Department of Education employees, and Breyer refused to block a mandate for Maine healthcare workers seeking religious exemptions. Because none of them give reasons for the refusal to block mandates, and because the 3 justices come from different sides of the aisle, it's unclear if it's because they agree with the mandates or they want the cases to work their way up to the Supreme Court through the proper appeals process. But I think we can expect that the vaccine mandate question will eventually make its way to the Supreme Court. Currently, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has put a temporary halt to the announced Biden mandates that require all federal workers, contractors, and private companies with over 100 employees to get vaccinated or test and mask. Now, they may or may not lift this stay while the mandates are being debated in courts, but no matter what they decide, it actually doesn't mean the mandates have been deemed constitutional or unconstitutional. The mandate question will need to see its proper day in court. And it likely won't be one court case, but several vaccine mandate cases with different angles. One is likely to involve whether or not the federal government has the power to issue mandates over private businesses. Another is likely to involve whether or not private companies can place mandates over their employees on their own volition. Another is likely to involve religious exemptions. There may be even a few more angles that make their way up the courts, but it's not likely to be one blanket decision regarding whether or not vaccine mandates can or cannot happen. Because the mandate question is likely to be broken into different cases with different angles, with the current Supreme Court makeup, we're likely to see different rulings to each question. Now, hopefully I haven't lost you already in all of this boring legal jargon by this point, because this is where things actually get really interesting. There's no telling how these justices are going to rule, but I can tell you it's probably not likely to be how we think. Most people tend to believe liberal justices side with liberals and conservative justices with conservatives. So people might expect the 3 liberal justices to rule in favor of vaccine mandates and the 6 conservatives to be against them, because in the world of CNN and Fox News, this is how the issue is split. But it isn't that simple. As I mentioned before, Amy Coney Barrett one of the most conservative justices on the bench, refused to put a stop to Indiana University's mandate. Now, this could be because she wants the cases to go through the appeals process, or she could believe a person doesn't have the right to blanket control over their bodies. I mean, she is notoriously pro-life, and granting vaccine choice might interfere with her subsequent abortion rulings. Maybe she thinks a person doesn't have the right to harm another person, be they a fetus or a person they infect. Who knows? But here's the thing. She joined liberal Justice Breyer in denying putting a stop to Maine's vaccine mandate for religious healthcare workers seeking an exemption. And what's more interesting is Kavanaugh, who is also conservative and thought to be pro-life, joined in with liberal Justice Breyer and conservative Coney Barrett. Now, 3 other conservative justices, however, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, wrote a lengthy dissent disagreeing with the other 3, feeling the religious exemption deserved immediate attention. So, and I want to point out that when Breyer issued saying we're not going to take this case, and Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh joined in with him, it was like a paragraph long, didn't really give a whole lot of reasons as to why, sort of alluded to, didn't really hadn't gone through the proper process of debates. But the dissenting justices, the 3, wrote about 7 or 8 pages in dissent. So they feel pretty strongly about it. But so far, we've seen 2 liberal justices, Sotomayor and Breyer, along with 2 conservative justices, Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh, refuse to temporarily stop mandates. We've also seen 3 conservative justices, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas, argue in favor of a temporary halt for religious exemption. We have no idea how Kagan or Roberts are going to lean because these issues hit on so many different aspects of the law. On one hand, conservative justices would likely rule in favor of allowing private employers to mandate whatever they want because conservative justices often side with businesses. However, they would likely rule against federal mandates on private employers because they're often against big government. Liberal justices would theoretically rule in favor of federal mandates, but against private employers trying to coerce employees into mandates. And it's kind of a toss-up on how any of them would rule regarding religious exemption in this case. Now, usually conservatives favor religious exemptions, but again, this issue in particular can carry consequences for other cases involving bodily medical autonomy. Basically, these issues are not easy to predict, and they likely won't turn out how any of us expect. But one thing is for sure is that it will take a while for these cases to make their way through the courts. And I don't think we can expect answers to these issues anytime soon, even though people might want them right away. The only thing that can happen are lower court rulings that either allow or halt mandates while they make their way up through the courts for the ultimate decisions. It's going to be really interesting, Ryan and Robbie. I'm curious how you think the courts would rule on this because, I mean, so far it's been a mixed bag, and how they've aligned is mixed. I don't think this is going to go down party lines in any way that this is broken up. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the federal vaccine mandate for Biden's mandate for private employees at firms that employ more than 100 people, I think that one is going to ultimately be doomed. But you're right that it's not so clear cut. For instance, Brett Kavanaugh tends to, so far in the rulings we've seen from him, I think he tends to be a little bit more deferential to government authority. Justice Breyer is the most deferential to government authority. He basically thinks the Constitution gives government to he's a person of liberal persuasion, but he thinks the Constitution gives the government really wide latitude to do whatever it needs to do. You have people like, Gorsuch and Thomas in some cases, but then not in others, are a little bit more of libertarian in character, although Thomas takes the odd view that children have absolutely no rights. So you're right, anyway, that they have idiosyncrasies that don't always line up along pure partisan lines.
And I think what makes this tricky for people to get their heads around is that they're not necessarily evaluating these mandates based on the particular vaccine. And so a lot of people who spend a lot of time reading about this online or talking about this online are really steeped in the nuances of the different studies about the efficacy and the side effects of the particular vaccines at question here. But for the justices, it's a broader question about the role of federal power, the role of corporate power, and they will take into account uncontroversial mandates like allowing public schools to say measles, mumps, rubella is a required vaccination, in order to come in. And so then you'll have, the vaccine skeptics saying, well, wait a minute, this is completely different than measles, mumps, rubella. Right. And some of the Supreme Court justices will be like, well, that's not our job. Like it's not
Right, exactly.
We're not the FDA. We're not going to go in here and reevaluate the different studies and say that, well, the measles one was properly authorized, but the
Right, they're
Pfizer was
evaluating whether COVID in the workplace is akin to like a biosafety hazard, like a dangerous, like a chemical spill or something that OSHA can regulate under its existing authority. But it is not clear at all that authority, that the disease is similar to. I mean, that's a question. That's going to be one of the main questions for the court.
And you could even see a scenario where some workplaces. The answer was one thing. Let's say you're in a closed, confined space, forced to be very tight.
With a lot of people that all have to show up for work.
With a lot of people that have can't wear masks because of the heat or whatever indoors.
Right.
Compared to landscapers working outdoors who are 6 feet from each other. So you could see things saying, well, you have to go back and tailor these rules more specifically. But yes, it's going to be. I think you're right that it's not obvious how they're going to come down.
No, we might be very surprised once they do finally make all of these various rulings. And I do think it's going to be multiple different cases that eventually make their way up through the courts. And we might be really surprised which justices go with who. And, like Breyer and Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh, agreeing on something with Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch on the other side of it. That's interesting. That's an interesting split right there, right?
Sure is.
Elena Kagan took this, didn't she? I think take the side of the conservative side in that the cake baking case, or one of the cake baking cases from a few years ago, right? Because she said that she did think the agency evaluating whether the cake bakers had that they were so manifestly hostile to religion that she took their side. So you never know.
No, you don't.
You never know. Never know.
But we'll have more rising after this. That we do know.